Hi ho everybody and welcome back to D Plus Us Weekly, a show where we talk about shows episode by episode, week by week, kind of, for our enjoyment and yours. I'm one of your hosts, Griffin Tennell. Griffy D-Pad with me as always is the wonderful, the amazing Mr. Mitch George. How are you doing tonight?
Tired.
This series got away from us.
You don't say.
So looking back, folks, we told you at the top of this series that scheduling was going to be a little weird. Mitch, very busy as a father. Me, very busy within a move. But there's another little wrinkle in there called the holidays. So we knew a lot of stuff was going to happen. We weren't necessarily going to be recording this one on time. I expected us to do better, though, than getting through 2 episodes.
I thought we got through the first,
but
3.
We got through the first 3, but the first 2 was a 2-episode premiere.
Doesn't matter. I still count it. I also totally started this with the regular intro in my recording instead of the weekly one because we totally fell off.
Oh, yeah. We totally fell off on this one. The only reason I'm putting the weekly intro on this is because we already have 2 with the weekly intro on.
I know.
It is kind of hilarious how badly we fell off on this one, but we warned y'all that's how this is going to be sometimes. So here's the rigmarole anyways. Welcome to D Plus Us Weekly, a show where we talk about shows week by week, episode by episode, where we break them down, hang out, and have a good time. If you enjoy that, head over to youtube.com/@DPlusUs to check out the weekly show where we talk about shows like this, where we talk about other shows like What If, and the normal show all at once, or we talk about movies, games, etc., theme park, etc. I'm sure we're going to get some crazy theme park episodes later this year. With the fact that I'm moving to Orlando, but
I'm not jealous at all.
Which is not
it's also,
for the
it's
show.
also Florida, so you win some, you lose some. But also there's this whole 51st state thing, which Trump needs to shut up about. But you're going to hear all about that, I'm sure, in Florida.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Anyways, we have a bunch of episodes that we have not gone through, so I'm just going to read them off alongside their directors, and then we're just going to talk about the show in general. The 3 episodes that we did get through were This Could Be a Real Adventure, directed by John Watts, Way Out Past the Barrier, directed by David Lowery, and Very Interesting as an Astrogation Problem, also directed by David Lowery. Now, the episodes we have not gotten through, stick with me because pretty much every one of these episode titles is a mouthful. Can't Say I Remember No at Atten, directed by Daniel Kwan and Daniel Scheinert. You have a lot to learn about pirates, directed by Jake Schreier. Zero Friends Again, directed by Bryce Dallas Howard. We're going to Be in So Much Trouble, directed by Lee Isaac Chung. And The Real Good Guys, directed by John Watts. This series, just in general, at this point I'll just give you all the highlights of starring Jude Law, Ravi Conyers, Ryan Kira Armstrong, Kiriana Crater, Robert Timothy Smith, and Nick Frost. Showrunners being John Watts and Christopher Ford. Composed by Michael Giacchino, and for all of the wonderful things we can talk about within the show, I gotta start talking about the theme. Because this is one of my new favorite themes in Star Wars.
What's interesting about this is that you say scored by Michael Giacchino. It was partially. The
composed.
Theme was written by Michael Giacchino. The series was scored by his son, Mick Giacchino, which I thought was really neat.
Yes, thank you. But seriously,
that
theme is so good.
It's really good.
For me, in a lot of ways, it brought whimsy back into Star Wars for me in a way I just didn't see coming.
This show is interesting to me because we both hit a holiday lull where I think you finished the show tonight. I think I binged everything the day before the finale and then watched the finale the day that it dropped. But there was something about a couple of those middle episodes where I just didn't care about where they were trying to the interstitials between the core story of getting back to Atten, where you had the other planets and you had the owl lady thing and you had some spa visit. There was some fun shenanigans.
There's really only
but in
one
general, it all just
like.
felt like filler to get to the ending, which didn't feel super satisfying to me throughout. I love the finale. I think the finale is the best episode of this show, which we don't say often about a Disney Plus show.
See, I disagree. I do not think that. I love the episode. It's fantastic, amazing. I don't think it's my favorite episode. I don't think it's the best episode. I think the best episode.
I personally loved the way they stuck the landing. I think there was a few things that they left open-ended for a potential season 2, which I doubt that it gets, just given the viewership and what the show cost to produce.
That's fair.
That being said, I'm very content with the story that they told here and do feel like this is going to be a Star Wars story that gets somewhat of a cult following within this universe, similarly to what we saw with Rogue One, where
I will leave
Rogue
this
One
quote.
didn't do gangbusters, but there was a lot of people that really liked that, so much so that we got 2 seasons of Andor out of it.
Yeah, my favorite episode was Zero Friends Again. The episode where they're on Pocket, they're on the spa planet, and they split up. And like Wim has to repair KB, while Neil and Fern are climbing up the cliff. I really, really loved that episode. And I really liked a lot of this. I agree that there definitely felt like there was some filler in there, particularly the planet that was a lot like theirs, but not quite like theirs.
I mean, I understand the story they were trying to tell with that planet of like, this is what happens if the barrier comes down. This is what happens if you're found or war breaks out, whatever, because they live in this idealized society. But it didn't do a great job of explaining that to the audience. And it also really didn't have much consequence other than just adding to the stakes of getting back to At-Atten and leaving it in the state that it's in.
Yeah, the biggest consequences I think that episode had was the end with 33 turning on them, only for it to be undone at the beginning of the next episode.
Yeah.
I feel like that's kind of the issue of this show. Is a lot of it is it moves a little too fast for its britches sometimes, where it's like that could have been the best episode of the show, like showing that loss of hope from that world because the barrier went down, and I think it would have made that decision to destroy the barrier at the very end all of that the better, but it just doesn't have the time to really get that point across, and rather it's just very focused on Neil and war and violence. And I think we see a lot of it. The reason why I'm fine with like kind of more fillery in quotes episodes in a show like this is because every single thing that happens on this is teaching these kids something. And I think that was really like every single time something happened in this show, there was some sort of growth from the kids. But there wasn't enough growth that they're not still kids by the end of this show.
Which I think is probably the point. Like they don't. I mean, there is this whimsy in Wim, which I know I made a joke about that in one of our previous recordings. But even at the end of this, him looking to the sky, wanting to see what more is out there, I could totally see there being a future where he just pops up in the Mando movie or something like that, and just in universe, it makes sense. He's somewhere out there doing a thing.
So that little just keeping that lightsaber, right?
I mean, why not? I wouldn't be surprised he went out and he ended up becoming friggin' dude's Padawan that I can't remember from Rebels that showed up in Ahsoka.
Cal Kestis? Oh, for Rebels. Ezra?
Right. Yeah, that's the one. Like, I think they'd be fun together. But at the same time, like, there's just, this works as an isolated Star Wars story. And I think that's the best thing it has going for it. Where if you are a fan of Star Wars and you are a fan of the Goonies, you will probably like this. That being said, this probably could have been a 2-hour movie rather than 8-hour series.
Yeah, I think everything about this show is fun. I think you can tell that this was kind of pitched as a movie initially. Like you have the vibes of that there, but I really like everything that we got from this. The whole idea of like, you know, the old Republic versus the new Republic and what happens to the society that is kind of closed off. I love how quickly that society just turns dystopian the minute the pirates show up, both in terms of like what's actually happening as well as aesthetics. The production value in this show is insane when it comes to set design. Whether it is the
it was
CG
only
stuff
it
or
only
the
on
physical
it was
stuff.
only on average like $17 million an episode. So that money did come through at times.
Oh yeah,
But
especially
I
in
do
that
still
finale.
think this was way like this needed to be smaller, I think, to be any like on any measurable metric successful for Disney. And I do think this is one of those things where they will take the feedback they get from this and come up with a different way to tell Star Wars stories. Because you look at something like Mandalorian, where, you know, they created all this new technology for it, but at the same time, it was a very small story, right? It was father-son, it was bounty, reward, it was outlaw, like Wild West. it was a very specific aesthetic with a smaller scale that has now grown astronomically, but that's a conversation for, I guess, the Mando movie at this point.
Well, we've also talked about how Mando has like as it has grown in I guess spectacle and in scale, it has diminished a little bit in how much we love it. And I think
Yep.
you can see that in this episode, in this show too. Of like, my favorite moments are the small moments between them. I love that one episode because the most powerful moment in the show in that episode is just one character sitting and another character fixing things directly in front of them. There isn't a greater event happening in that exact moment.
I mean, the conversation, like going to that episode specifically, the conversation that KB has with,
When
I can't remember any of the character names. Fern?
No, that one was. Or are you talking about the argument with Fern or the conversation with Wim?
No, I'm talking about the conversation with Fern after when they regroup of like, I can't do what you need me to do because I'm not the same as you. Like, I think that's really powerful. And that is the biggest, like, I think that's the most human this show gets. And I really love that episode for that moment. I just think from a Star Wars story perspective, I love the way that this wrapped up and would love to see where some of these characters end up because I know it's not going to be Skeleton Crew season 2.
Yeah, I honestly don't think there needs to be a season 2. I really like how this episode how the show ends. Like, it's over, it's contained. You can tell that they went into this like, we want to make one episode of television, or one season of television. We want this to be a story that begins and ends, and we move on. Which isn't
See,
always...
for me, there are a couple of things that I would love to see, and that's just what happened to Jod at the end of this, and the fallout of bringing the barrier down, and what inviting the New Republic in means to this planet that has been entirely isolated from the conflict of the Galactic Civil War and the creation of the New Republic, and what does that do to their society, and what is the fallout for these kids in terms of how they become part of this larger universe. I think that would be really interesting, but
See,
it remains
I
to be
would
seen if
agree
we'll
with
see
those
more
are
of it.
interesting, but those also just sound like very different TV series, very different projects than what Skeleton Crew is. Skeleton Crew is, I think it's kind of the thing of where it's very similar to Mando, right? Where like, and hang with me on this one because it's gonna be, I'm gonna go out there just a little bit. It feels like Skeleton Crew almost needs a Book of Boba Fett style thing, where it is a separate story within that same story, but focused from another angle. Where it can have a different tone, because if you're going to follow the same tone for this story, either about Jod afterwards or about this planet coming into its own within the New Republic, it's not going to work. That needs its own separate tone, its own separate style, its own separate production techniques. Like, it really needs to stand alone as its own series, I would tell you, or movie, depending on how you want to tell that story. Like, so, not Book of Boba Fett in the way of like, let's have this interstitial that's not important at all, but more of a, let's have the same similar story, just separated because it is totally different.
Yeah, I can understand and agree with that perspective. I also feel like this probably suffered somewhat from not like we ask for these stories that are isolated and somewhere else in the Star Wars universe, but I do think something like this would have, if it had its Book of Boba Fett moment and that was tied into a character that was pre-existing within the Star Wars mythos, that could probably have lent itself a little more to catching viewership, which I know ultimately is going to be the reason why Disney's going to come out and say, well, this was planned as a limited series, so we got what we got, and maybe these things will be continued somewhere else. But I do think that it had a greater chance at success had it, tied in somewhat to something else other than just being in the same time frame as Mando.
Yeah, we know for sure, by the way, that it's at the same time.
We know it's post, like it's New Republic era, right? So it's post Episode 6, which is where Mando takes place.
Yeah, and I know it's got to be roughly the same time because there are the same pirates in this that there are in Mando season 3.
And one of the X-wing pilots, I think, was in Mando, but
So
I could be wrong
probably
about that.
probably post Mando season 3, before whatever happens in the Mando movie.
Hmm. I don't know.
Maybe that's where we
I
see
don't.
Jod and Alwood next. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if that's where we put in those characters, or see something pop up in something like Ahsoka. Okay, I mean Ahsoka's a far stretch, but you get what I'm saying.
No,
Like,
I could see them popping up there. I mean,
I mean,
Jod
Ahsoka's.
specifically.
The only reason I say that was a stretch is because Ahsoka's story is currently in an entirely separate galaxy.
That is true. But no, I do think that there's a world in which maybe he is part of the big bad crew of one of these upcoming projects, and it just makes sense because they're continuing this thread, and that someone to the like, I could see like someone to the caliber of Jude Law as an actor. You'd think coming into a large IP like this, especially after already getting burned a bit with Marvel and doing a prequel, of like, hey, I want to commit to this franchise, to this universe, but I don't want it to be one and done. You know what I mean? So maybe there is plan to use that character elsewhere in this universe, but who knows?
At the same time, I could totally see him like being like, "Nah, I want to do one and done. Like, I don't want to commit to a big franchise." Um, I will tell you, Jod is one of the more interesting parts of the show for me. Like, don't get me wrong, I love the kids, but Jod is a consistent thing throughout the show that I just find hilarious. Of this person who was like, his power is manipulation, right? He was trained by this rogue Jedi, which I is an interesting enough concept that I would be interested enough to see. But like for the most part, 90% of what he does is manipulation. And like every time he's manipulating thinking beings, with the exception of the pirates, it goes terribly. But he's an expert when it comes to manipulating droids. And I love how that was brought throughout the show and then brought into that finale of it's like, oh, the supervisor's a droid. So the dude's clearly going to be winning in this situation because he can handle droids. I really love that how that kind of grew throughout the show. Not entirely satisfied by the reveal of how he has force powers. And like definitely that's where I agree we could have some additional context there or more story outside of the
See,
show, but
see, I kind of liked his backstory as a Force user of just like he was never trained. He was found in a hole by a Jedi in some hole in the wall,
oh, I
and the
like the
Jedi got
story. I
messed
don't
up.
like how it
And
was revealed. I don't
oh,
like that it
I
was just a
see.
throwaway line and we moved on.
I mean, that's the. Yeah, you think with a show like this, they have time to explore that, but at the same time, I've already said, this probably would have made sense as a smaller feature than a limited run or limited series. And I just, I don't know if this was just the wrong story to tell in this universe, but I, I don't know. It's for me, it's a bit of a mixed bag. I love moments of it, and there are other ones just like, why?
Yeah, I want to talk about a couple of other moments that I personally really loved. I love the Onyx Cinder, both that initial ship and then revealing the reveal, especially of like hitting the button to purge the hole and show the true ship, and then the reveal that the ship is a ship of At-Atin, and that was Captain What's His Name's plan the entire time.
Yeah, that was cool. I mean,
Um,
I would just love a prequels book or comic or something just about this captain because he sounds like a cool dude.
oh, mark my words, we are absolutely getting a comic book about that guy.
I hope we do.
Like it
Although we
is.
know where he ends up, which is part of the problem with prequels, but that's just,
Yeah, but I mean the
the way it is.
comics. We have hundreds of comics about Luke, Leia, Han, and Chewie, and we know how they're going to end up.
You're true.
So,
Yeah, that's true.
like, I don't think that's an issue anymore when it comes to Star Wars. We love Andor. We know how that's going to end up. I also wasn't expecting with this show to tie in Order 66.
I thought it was a fun nod. Like this world has been shut off for so long that the last thing they knew of the universe was Order 66.
It was just, it was one of the things I just didn't see coming. Like, I love it, and it's perfect for what this show is.
It makes sense. Yeah.
especially with like how much they play up him not technically being a Jedi. Like it really was this cool moment. I'm looking through like notes on the show to see if there's any other particular moments that come up. Do you have anything you particularly liked or disliked you want to talk about?
I mean, we talked about the big thing, which was just the discussion of KB's disability in episode 6, I guess it was. I love SM-33 just as a character. I thought it was really fun just having this droid that flip flopped, and Adventures was like, we can skirt the rules a little bit to put Fern back in charge and just tries and decks Jod. I thought that was
hilarious. Yeah, SM-33 was definitely a standout for me. I love this droid.
And Neil, I mean, is the best. And
dude, I really went from like not liking Neil at first to loving Neil at one point. Like that was such a fun character to me. Of it's like, no, we're gonna have a character here that's for all intents and purposes a pacifist because the child is like, yeah, no, we're not gonna fight. Also, because these children, frankly, couldn't fight. And that's what made them interesting within this. Yeah, it was.
That's part of the challenge of a story focused on children in this universe. Because, like, you have the lackadaisy nature in which they're able to navigate the world, but at the same time, like, you don't want to, expose these children to too much of the hate and villainy in the galaxy, but they do to an extent. Like, you know what I mean, right? There's only so far that they can push the envelope in a show like this when it's focused on kids. So there's definitely more to be told with this kind of story, and it could it have been a more adult oriented product to try and pull in more viewers, maybe. But who knows over time if this will maybe have legs with kids
Star Wars
coming
is
into
for
Star
children.
Wars.
And I feel like we forget that a lot. Star Wars is for children. This is not the most serious franchise in the world. I really like that, and I think for that reason, I think it's an inspired decision to make this about pirates within Star Wars. Can you imagine if this show was about like the Sith and kids seeing the Sith for the first time when they imagined?
I mean, they did that. It was called The Acolyte, and it didn't really go very well from a viewership perspective either.
I mean, the kids, and some would argue they were bad to begin with, but like those kids were clearly Sith to begin with. Like these kids, though, like it makes sense for it to be about pirates, and I think adding pirates within the lore of Star Wars is something I really, really love. And it's not something we talk about too much, and I hope we don't. It kind of reminds me of having this kind of little bit of air of mystery around it that like bounty hunting used to have. Before we got more about Boba Fett, before we got Mando and all of that, like. We knew there was rules to the bounty hunting. We knew that there was the Bounty Hunters Guild, but we didn't really know any specifics beyond that. Now we know a ton of specifics, which is cool, and I love having that within the world. But it's nice to have, like, the pirates, and, like, we know the pirates' code. We know bits and pieces of it. We don't know all of it. We don't really know too much about the world of the pirates other than what we've seen in this show. And I love that pirates just exist in this because... of course they exist. Anything that has ships in it is going to have pirates.
We've also seen pirates, right? Like we saw them in Force Awakens. We've seen them in various animated media. So it's nice to just take something that already does exist in the universe, just expand upon it a little bit, leverage existing storytelling tropes, and just frame it around Star Wars and the things that are already existing in the universe. I think John Watts did a great job of crafting an original story that feels like a Star Wars story, but it's also very much stands on its own legs within this very large canon of Star Wars, even with everything they threw out.
And the very large canon that Neil uses at the end of the show.
That too, yeah, that was fun.
I do have one critique on this show when we talk about pirate shows, and that's the fact that there's a character missing. This is a pirate show in Star Wars, and there's no Hondo Ohnaka. And that should be disappointing to everybody.
It didn't need it.
I know it didn't need it. I just love Hondo, okay?
I know, but with the story they were trying to tell, like, I do like the idea of...
Hondo would have fucked it all up.
Well, the adult that they have is also, like, not a good guy, and it, like, flips back and forth. Is he going to betray them? Is he not? Will he? Won't he? Will he care about them? Will he not care about them? And there's definitely a gray area that's explored there, which I think is a really interesting decision, especially with the way that Jedi and Sith tend to operate and
One of
in
these
the light and the
days,
dark, and he very much just lives in the gray. But how do you fit Hondo into that story?
you don't. You absolutely don't.
You
One of
don't.
these days, though, I want to do a comparison of like Jod and the kids here versus Hondo and Ezra, because I feel like
Yeah.
they are very good opposites. Where Jod does go bad, but Hondo goes good, and I feel like there's something there to explore at some point. But yeah, this show is. I think this show is worth existing. I think this show is worth the 8 episodes here. I think it has some pretty high highs and some pretty mid, I would say, lows.
Yeah.
I think it's worth it though. I like it. I like all 8 episodes of the show.
Yeah, I mean, for me, there were just things I wouldn't go back and rewatch. If I was to watch this abridged, there'd probably be a couple things in there that I would just forget about. But at the same time, I think it's a fun story to tell. I think it's an interesting, it's a different kind of story that we haven't really seen from Disney, with a focus on child actors like this, especially with an IP as large as Star Wars. And they did with things like Willow and stuff like that. And we saw how well that went for them. So it's probably not going to encourage, the key stakeholders to continue to do things in this manner, which is unfortunate because I love when we get more unique stories out of these universes. But at the same time, like, they got to make money. Like they're a business, they're a corporation. They're just looking to make money. So it'll be interesting to see what, if anything, comes of the reception to this show. With
Yeah,
it
I'm
being
interested to
received
see
well
it.
critically, but not as well, like not seeing the viewership that they probably would have expected.
Yeah, I think this is one of those where it's nice to have, but it's not going to do massive numbers. And I think that they're going to have to take the win on this of the critical reception. Of this is going to be good. This feels like it's going to hit in like a couple years when it's like, what are we going to watch right now? Oh, well, how about this show that came out a little while ago that we all missed? That's kind of the vibe I'm getting here of this one. Or like kind of like Encanto, or like no one cared about it when it came out in theaters. And then it hits Disney Plus, and suddenly people care again. Like, I feel like this has the standing power. I really do, but I think
I hope so. I
not
hope,
going
I
to
hope
be
it doesn't.
understood.
I just hope it doesn't disappear like other things on Disney Plus have.
I see.
I don't think it will because it's got Star Wars behind it. But
It's got that Star Wars
never
name.
say never.
True. Of course, that is a topic, though, for next time, folks. Thank you very much for listening. Whatever the hell the next weekly series, who the hell knows? But we'll figure that out.
Are we Spider-Man All at Once? Is that weekly?
Yeah, we'll have to look into it.
Goosebumps dropped all at once, but we could just do it each episode or something. I don't know.
We'll figure it out. Of course, folks, just stick around for this. Stick around for the main show. We got plenty of stuff coming.
Worst case scenario, you're holding out, and we'll get Daredevil in March-ish.
That sounds right to me.
I don't know. The trailer dropped, and we should probably watch that and react to it here on youtube.com/@D+us. But
yeah, find that trailer reaction available, hopefully, now. I say hopefully, because who the hell knows we don't even know.
Yeah, because I'm sure Griffin will have put a button somewhere here, because you can do that on the YouTubes, right?
I can do that.
know.
I'm way too lazy to do that, but you
I know.
can do that. Okay, folks. We're going to wrap this episode up. Find us all the places at D+us. We will see y'all in the next episode. But until then, be good to each other, bright suns, and have a magical day.